There's been a bit of a theme developing this morning. I'm not sure if you guys kind of pick up on it like I do, but it just so happens that the theme is the topic of my talk today. The power of relationships. And I think the undeniable link between relationships and learning, and we've seen that this morning in so many different ways. In researching for this talk, I did a little search on the TED website on the word relationships. It came up with 7,453 hits. I think this is important for a couple reasons. Number one, clearly there's other people in the world that care about this topic. And number two, nothing you hear me say from this point forward will be original. I want to just set the stage a little bit. I want you guys to think back to the most powerful and meaningful learning experience that you guys have had as either a student, a teacher, or just as a member of society. Think back to those moments. Now put your hand up if that powerful learning opportunity had something to do with a meaningful relationship in your life. I would argue that it's impossible to have that meaningful learning relationship or meaningful learning opportunity without the relationships. Today, I'm going to tell you just a few stories about how I came to this realization, how I came to the idea that relationships are the most important element in education. I get asked the question a lot as a teacher. I'm sure some other people in this room who are teachers get asked this question. Why did you become a teacher? When I get asked that question, I tell this story. I was a grade 8 student. I lived in northern BC. And my friends and I really only cared about one thing in the world, and that was basketball. We lived for it. We played basketball every opportunity we could get. We were in the gym, at lunch, after school, at the outdoor court on the weekend. It was our reason for being. We cared about one other thing, but that's for another talk, I think. We were grade 8s. The beginning of my grade 8 year, 2 teachers transferred into my school in northern BC to kind of cut their teeth as their first year teachers. One was a former UVic basketball player, and one was a coach of basketball who was really passionate about athletics. They spent that year with me and my friends, coaching us in all the sports that we participated in, particularly basketball, driving us around all over northern BC, talking to us on those trips about how to become better basketball players, but also how to become better people. It was a really meaningful opportunity for me to have some mentors in my life, have some champions in my life that had a great impact on me. At the end of that year, between grade 8 and 9, I was fortunate to be selected to go to a volleyball camp at BCIT in Vancouver. And my parents also signed me up for a basketball camp at UVic a week after that camp. But they couldn't really figure out how they were going to go about organizing all this. We didn't know anybody on the Lower Mainland. I was a 14-year-old kid. I had to get from my little town in northern BC down to and in between these 2 tournaments. So my 2 teachers stepped up. My parents put me on the plane. I flew down to Vancouver. One of my teachers who spent the summers in Vancouver picked me up at the airport. I spent the weekend with his family. He drove me to the volleyball tournament or volleyball camp. I spent the week there. He picked me up at the end of the camp, drove me to the ferry. The other teacher who spends the summers in Victoria picked me up at the other side of the ferry. I spent the weekend with him and his family. I went to the basketball camp. At the end of the camp, he took me back to the ferry. The other teacher picked me up at the other side, took me back to the airport. I flew back to northern BC. On the plane ride home, I was reflecting. I was reflective at 14. It's odd. I was reflecting on the experience that I had in those 2 weeks, but also on the experience that I've had with these 2 individuals over the course of that year. And it was that moment that I decided I was going to be a teacher. This relationship that these people had built with me impacted and had changed the course of my life. Interesting follow-up to that story. Over the last 5 or 6, maybe 10 years, I've been thinking that I needed to contact these people and let them know what an influence they had on me, and I never found an opportunity to be able to do that. I was sitting in a gym at Bishop's University this summer watching a Canada Games basketball game between BC and Newfoundland. And it's just something that I do. I always scan the roster of the teams. I don't know why I do that. I look for a name that I might recognize. It's just, anyway, something that I do. And I noticed a name of one of the kids on the BC team, and it was the same name as one of the teachers that I'd had back in BC. And I thought, well, could it be? This is odd. So I started looking around the gym, looking for where the BC parents were sitting. They were sitting right in front of me. All the BC parents were there, facing out to the game. And I sort of started scanning the faces in the crowd. And I noticed this face of this individual that was sitting right in front of me in the crowd. I tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around, and there was my high school teacher in front of me. And I had an opportunity. I introduced myself. He didn't recognize me. I've changed a bit since grade 8. I had an opportunity to tell this individual how powerful an influence he had on me. So the lesson here for me was you never know what that extra that you give into those relationships, that time that you spend with those kids, what kind of an influence that will have on someone's life. And it certainly had a huge influence on mine. I failed Math 30 twice. I'm not proud to say that, but it's part of my history. My first teaching assignment as a grade 8 teacher, I got a math class that I had to teach. Of course, in the interview, I sold myself as just an expert math teacher. You know, this is no problem. I'll be able to do this with my eyes closed. But inside, I was a little nervous about that. I decided very early on that I wasn't going to wow these kids with my math abilities. But what I was going to do is I was going to purposefully build relationships with these students. I spent time at lunch. I opened my classroom up. I had some chess boards in there. They'd play chess. We did mathletics. We did all this really cool stuff. I took my math class on a field trip. I spent the year making connections with these kids, talking about not just math, but things that were going on in their lives and other things. At the end of that year, one of the students came up to me and said, "This is the first time I've ever liked math. You're the best math teacher I ever had." And I thought to myself, wow, if you only knew, you know, how pathetic I am at math. And I spent a lot of my evenings and days just trying to stay one step ahead of the kids. But it was a very rewarding experience. And the lesson that I learned there is it's not about the curriculum. The curriculum's important, and we need to get through certain concepts and make sure the kids learn it. But that's not what's going to catch the kids. That time that you spend in those relationships that you invest in are the things that are really going to matter. I was very, very fortunate to teach at a local high school in Rockview here in Cochrane for the majority of my career. There was one particular group of students that I began. They were in grade 9 when I started teaching at this school, and I just had a really unique connection with this group. I coached them. Some of the kids I coached actually for 4 years in basketball through their whole career at the school. I took them on outdoor ed trips. We traveled all around southern Alberta. We were hiking and canoeing and kayaking and playing basketball. There was just a real unique bond that I had with this group, and I think they had with me as well. One day I was supervising in the gym, and one of the girls that was sort of a part of this group came up to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Polhill, are you going to the grad fashion show this weekend?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to the grad fashion show. You know, I bought a ticket. I want to support the graduating class." I thought it was a bit odd that she was asking me this question, but I just kind of rolled with it, and she sort of took off kind of giggling, and I thought it was odd. 2 days later, one of the boys came to me. He said, "Polhill, I got to tell you what's going on here. These girls have hatched a plan to set you up on a date, and they have this lady coming to the grad fashion show." It sort of caught me off guard, and I'd never felt quite so pathetic before in my life. These students were setting me up on a date. But then upon reflection, I thought it was kind of cool that these kids cared enough about me that they were investing in my personal life a little bit. And to be honest, I hadn't been on a date in a long time, so I was spending so much time building relationships with the students, I didn't really have time for that. So I went, and I was subject to possibly the most awkward introduction by high school students that anybody should have to be subjected to before. The lesson here for me was, I think you'll receive far more back than you'll ever give into these relationships that you invest in. Maybe even a date, in that case it was. As a side note, that lady that they introduced me to and I have been married for 8 years, and these are our children. Oh, that's my aha moment. I don't think, is there any HR people here? I don't think so. I can tell this story. My first interview in Rockyview was an interesting one. This quote kind of speaks to it. I got an interview at a school that was out in the middle of the field west of here, and I had difficulty even finding the place. When I walked into the school, I was met by the principal at the door, and he shook my hand, and we started to talk, and he asked me if I wanted to go on a little walk around the school, so we went on a little tour. He was asking me questions about kind of where I was from and what I was interested in, and he was sharing with me a little bit about his life. We were talking with kids. He was telling me about the school. We were wandering around the school for about 20 minutes. We got back to the front door, and he shook my hand and said, "Okay, well, thanks. It was nice meeting you, and we'll talk." I was kind of like, what? I thought I was here for an interview. I didn't really say that. I just kind of shook his hand and went out the door. And I was fortunate to get the job. And I spent the next 9 years of my career in the school. And what I found was that interview was indicative of the principles that the school was built on. The idea that relationships matter. We did a lot of really engaging and interesting things in that school. We were doing inquiry and constructivism before it was cool. And that was the foundation that was built upon. So what? Who cares? What's the big deal here? Well, I think we've heard this morning from a lot of other speakers that relationships do matter, that relationships and learning are linked together like nothing else. And I believe that they form the foundation of all the other important work in our building. And I think if you don't focus on relationships in your classroom and in your schools, you run the risk of watching all of that other important work that you do crumble. So if I could say one thing, make that the focus. The rest of it will take care of itself. Thank you.